Okay guys, so we are going to do the next dart manipulation, which is in the book here, the mid-shoulder dart. So this is going to be really similar from what we did before with the center waist dart, where we're just going to slash and spread and pivot from our bust point and kind of change the location of our dart. So I'll walk you through. The first thing we're going to do is take computer paper and our block for the bodice front that I have on a piece of cardboard to make it a little heavier, a little easier to trace. I'm going to put it right down here. Hold it tightly and just trace the outside edges all the way around. I'm going to make sure to get my little notches here so that I don't lose those. And then I'm also going to make sure to come into that hole that I made for the bust point and get that, okay? So now I can take this away and I'm going to redraw my dart legs. So from the notch here to the bust point, and this one too, from the notch to the bust point, there we go. I've got my notches coming through, and I think everything else is good. And what I can go ahead and do just to make sure you get in the habit of this is mark the grain line now as well, which is about an inch off, not about an inch, exactly an inch from that center front. There we go. And honestly, you could put this anywhere. I mean, it could be 4 inches, 5 inches, 3 inches. It just comes directly off of this line here, parallel. Well, everything has to go along. This is the grain line. So this center front line is your grain line. So you could mark it at any distance exactly parallel to there. Okay, so I've got my bodice front, and then following along with the instructions, the first thing I want to do, I want to take this dart here, which is in the center front, like on the princess line, and I want to move it to the middle of the shoulder. So you can honestly pick any point that you want in here, but I could also go ahead and make sure it's exactly in the middle of the shoulder. So maybe I'll measure. It looks like my shoulder is 2 3/4. So maybe I want to measure exactly in the middle. I could say 1 1.5-ish if I want, or I could go a little under that, 1 1/4, or directly in the center there. I'll make a little mark for myself. So now I've got a little mark for roughly the middle of my shoulder, but it could be wherever exactly you want that. This is your choice, just somewhere in the middle of the shoulder. Now I'm going to draw a new line radiating from my bust point, which is here, to that middle of the shoulder, because this is actually where I want my dart to be. I don't want the dart here anymore. I want to move it up here. So I end up with this line that kind of looks like this. And remember what we did before, we're going to slash and spread. So I've got some scissors, and I'm going to cut this one of the dart legs here, and I'm going to come in and cut this new line that we created for our middle of the shoulder dart. Whoops, and see, I tried not to cut all the way through, but I did. But that's okay. If you do, try to line it back up, and I'll just use like a little piece of tape so that this doesn't, see if I can get this to still pivot with this piece of tape. So the idea is that I want, oh wait, I can cut through my tape a little bit, there we go, so it can still move. I'm not going to cut all the way, I'm going to cut almost all the way this time. So I've got a little, it's still kind of connected by a thread. And what I want to do is close this previous dart. So I just close it, just like I'm sewing it. I'm bringing these 2 points together here. And now I've opened this really large dart opening right up here. And now that I've done that, I can tape this down, because now this is, I'll move this out of the way so you can see, this is my new pattern shape, okay? This really big giant dart that's gonna be up there in the shoulder. And what this does is it's gonna put the same amount of space that we needed for her bust, for her, you know, boobs to go in here basically, but we're gonna put all the fit up here instead. It's still gonna work. It's gonna be amazing. And you can have a tiny little fitted waist down here. So what I'll do to get this ready to now trace this again onto one more piece of paper is I'm gonna go ahead and cut it out the rest of the way. I will note that down here, where these two pieces are meeting, it's not super smooth. So this is where I would use that French curve to create a nice smooth line, because ideally this should be not straight across, you know, because obviously it isn't, but there should be a smooth delineation from here to here. I will say, I'm saying this because I don't have my French curve with me. My French curve is in the office, so I don't have it. But in the back of the book, I noticed there was, in the appendix with these same blocks and slopers, there is, I think there's a French curve in here. There we go, look. This is the French curve. There's this shape that I could print out and I could transfer to a piece of cardboard, and then I could use that shape. And what it does is it helps you smooth lines. This is how you get the lines, the really smooth curves around the armhole, around the neckline, and any other smooth curve, okay? And what I would do is I would take that here so that I can get a nice smooth line. Right now, I'm gonna cheat because look, this looks really similar when I'm looking at the two. The French curve has no lines on it. It actually allows you to move it just to get a smooth, traceable area. So I can do the same thing with my tape. I'm just gonna kind of line it up to where I see those 2 points touching in a smooth way. And let me see if I can show you. Even something like that, maybe I'll bring it down a little bit. See how I just used that, and it's very subtle to smooth out that line. Now I didn't need to go all this way, right? But I now have this smooth transition from here into here, and it's not jolty. It doesn't go burr, burr, burr. It's a nice smooth transition. So I just cheated and used this. Honestly, this is not the best curve. The great curve is really all in here, and what you do is just pivot this around. What I'll do is I'll print this out so that I can use it again and show you what I'm talking about, and maybe I'll put it on cardboard. And yours, if you bought it, and mine that I have in my office on campus, is clear, just like this plastic tape, so that you can just move it, you can pivot it. The idea is that you're just getting a super smooth shape everywhere. And like I say, it's exactly how they get this shape here, and this shape here is with this French curve. So if you have that good, use it down here. If not, you can improvise for now, but we'll definitely need that when we do some other patterns a little bit later. And so when I cut, I'm just holding this together really nicely, and I'm cutting on that new smooth line. Okay, so that, look, now I have a nice smooth, you can see from the back really well. It looks really nice and smooth instead of bumpy and jolty. And I'll cut out the rest of my pattern. And in this case, you can cut away your drawn pencil line and just get it entirely out of there, because we traced from our block. So we added that pencil line and we don't need it. If we traced, 100 times, we would start to add some serious weight to our pattern piece, because we'd be adding the amount of the pencil line every time. So just know that we want it to be exactly the same size. So the best way to do that is to cut off the pencil line that you just added. So I'm just cutting it away, okay? Nice and straight. So here's my new pattern piece for my mid-shoulder dart. And now I can retrace this on my paper. So I might, even when I'm setting this up, kind of notice that because I've got my big pattern piece up here, just like I have my dart here and I've got a big portion of it coming out, I can assume the same thing's gonna happen. So when I set this up on my piece of notebook paper, just so that I have enough space, I can take this really far down to the edge, okay, just to give myself lots of room up there. So I suggest you do the same. And I'm going to try to trace this really carefully because, again, I'm tracing now from a thin piece of paper. So it might be a little harder to trace it accurately without it moving. You can trace this line right now, or you can just kind of get the edge and redraw the line. Ooh. Make sure to get that notch. Oopsie. Trace all the way down. Trace your pretty new smooth line that you made. And we should have everything. So I did not trace the inside because I just figure I'll go ahead and draw that with my ruler. So I'll go from my notch point to the bust dart. And then here's another time where, again, I want to pinpoint out that before we draw this dart leg, this is our bust point that we're pivoting from. So this is the actual apex, right? The largest part of the bust. But again, maybe we don't want our dart pointing right to the largest part of the bust. So just like we kind of talked about initially, how this original pattern, remember it was dropped slightly from the original apex. Let's drop it. And then in this case, we're not really gonna drop it down because our dart is up here. We're gonna drop it up. So I could either draw my legs first and then move it, or I could move it and then draw my legs. Maybe I'll just draw really lightly my legs right now, my dart legs from that point, so that I can now take my ruler and I'm going to perfectly center. I'm going to drop it, but again in this case bringing it up 1/4 of an inch right from there. So I just kind of put it right between these two legs that I just drew, and this becomes my new dart point. This is still the apex, the bust point, but this is the dart point. I don't want to sew all the way to there. I don't want to be pointing at the bust, sort of Madonna style era, 90s era. So now I can redraw my new dart legs from this dropped dart point. I could even make them darker now, so I can really differentiate between the two. Okay, and now I can erase this previous one since I don't need it. So see how I did that? I can still show my original bust point if I want, but this is where my dart will be sewn to, okay? So now we have our final shape, and now what we would do is add seam allowance. So again, you can decide maybe this center front is cut on fold, and so it doesn't need seam allowance added. But then in that case, I'll still need to draw my grain line. In this case, I'm coming 1/2 inch from the edge. You can still come 1 inch out if you want. I'm just coming closer. And if it's a cut on fold, I draw lines that point to that line, and I can say, cut 1 on fold. And that's what that means. So now I've got the grain line in there, and I know that there is no seam allowance meant to be added here. But I do need seam allowance everywhere else. And I'm gonna add 1/4 of an inch. So I bring my ruler 1/4 of an inch from that shoulder. That's gonna be some seam allowance. That's gonna be some seam allowance. I'll do it with the neck. And again, I'm pivoting on a curve, just kind of basically doing these little dot to dots at 1/4 inch that will all connect as I move it around. If you see how I'm doing that, see they're all like connecting. Not always the prettiest. You can go nice and lightly so you don't have any ugly lines you have to erase. But now I have, see it, in 1/4 inch added there. This will be my final line here. I won't need seam allowance, so I can just connect it right there. Okay. And then remember how I said I like there to be squared corners, so it's really obvious to see where you're sewing. So now I've got that here. You can see this is clearly my seam allowance, but this is clearly where the inside of the garment will be. And then just like we did for that first making the block assignment, we're gonna fold this to get our dart excess shape, okay? And so our dart is gonna point towards center front, which is this way. So let's fold right on that line. You could fold both, you may only have to fold one, and again, I'm pushing the excess towards that center front, and I'm gonna bring this over just like this, and look how beautifully that lines up, and there's my original shoulder. So I could either cut this across to get the shape, or I can do this action with tracing the line with the tracing wheel, and if you can see, I've got this dot, 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 dot line that happens. So now I can come in and trace that for the shape of the dart excess, and I know it's accurate. And then this is dissimilar to what we did last time. Last time we didn't draw this in, remember? We added seam allowance on the inside. But this time we do want this, and we are gonna add seam allowance to the outside. Oh, and here's a mistake I just realized I did. When I traced, I'll go back and show you. When I traced on my outer line. And actually what I should have done, and I realize only now because you'll see it too, I should have traced on this line. This is the actual line. This was my seam allowance. I want to trace on the line of the garment, the seam line. There we go. Because what happens, if you can see I had come too far out by 1/4 inch. But it was pretty obvious as soon as I did it, so I think you would end up seeing the same thing. You're like, wait, these lines don't connect, they don't match. It's all about accuracy, so just go back and see what happened. So now I can I'll erase this so it doesn't get confusing. Ignore this line that I made that was way too big. And that was just a mistake where I went too far. But now I have my dart points. And then because these will end up being notches, I'll take this all the way, and my notch will go right here. And same, my notch will go right there, okay? And I can continue by adding 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. Pivoting around this corner. But you're still being accurate. You're not winging it. You are carefully moving your ruler around and around at different points, getting exactly 1/4 inch from that edge, making adjustments as needed until all of your lines connect. Okay, and when they do, again, that looks kind of rough, but I can easily clean that up when I either cut it or I can erase some excess. This is our notch, remember? So we're gonna connect that all the way to the edge, just as it is, and then put that T there, because that's our notch where we might connect a sleeve. This side seam is always a perfectly straight line. And again, I'm gonna make sure to square all of my corners so that it's really clear where these edges are, where you would sew, and what is seam allowance, okay? And then look what happened here at the bottom. Remember when I said I moved it so far down on the bottom of the page, I actually had a little bit of room, but now I don't have room for seam allowance down here. At first when I saw this, I was like, oh no, but actually it's really good because I can show you what to do if this happens. No big deal. I can take a little extra piece of paper and I could just tape it on, and I'll pretend like that never happened, okay? So I'll just tape right on top, and this it just happens from time to time, obviously, because sometimes when you're tracing you don't realize what shape's gonna open up, so no big deal. Now I've got a little extra, and now I can put my seam allowance back in. Just draw it right on top of that tape. Might have to draw like a little harder, depending on what kind of tape you have. Some tape works well with pencil line, some not so much. You could come in with a pen or something if you need to, if it's giving you an issue. Or marker, something like that. Okay, so this ends up being my finished pattern piece. And again, what I could do is cut this out entirely, and then that wouldn't even be an issue. Or I can leave it on this piece of paper. I'm just cutting off my weird little edges. I can leave it on this notebook piece of paper because it's a good way to keep it in a folder. But this is now my mid-shoulder dart. And so what am I missing? I've got, I guess if I'm going to leave it on the paper, then I do want to clean up any outside bits and make it look nice and neat. Like I meant all these things. It wasn't an accident. Okay, and now I just want to make sure I have all my elements. I have my grain line, I have my bust point, I have all my notches marked, my corners are marked. I really just need to say what this is. And it still is a bodice front, but this is now a mid-shoulder dart. And we've got everything we need. I will also put my name, just so that I've got all that. And now this pattern is done. And then the very last thing I want you to do, remember, is to draw a picture of what this would look like. And just like they have in the book, they have it drawn here. So I am going to draw this for you too, so that if we looked at it, we could quickly remember. Now I don't have a lot of space up here anymore, but I have a little space down here. So let me see if I can draw it down there. So again, all of these, they're going to start with our neckline, our shoulder, our sleeves, and they are all fitted at the waist. So this is like our basic bodice shape that we start with. But where's the dart coming from? It's coming from the mid-shoulder. Mid-shoulder here, mid-shoulder there. There are no darts down here because we took it away. So it's just basically two darts coming from up here at the shoulders that come a little bit above the actual bust point, because remember we brought this up a little bit so the darts aren't like pointing at your boobs. And so it looks, aside from the stripes, just like what they gave us here. Two darts coming down the middle of the shoulder. And this one is all done. And what you'll do is you'll continue in the same way with the next darts that we'll do. We'll also do the French dart, and in this case it'll be the exact same process. You'll just be moving and slashing your dart leg over here. The French dart sort of exists somewhere in the side seam, like the low side seam. So you'll pick a point, any point you want somewhere on the side seam, and slash and spread over to there. You'll move it, you'll have a big dart here. So just like with this guy, you'll have to find this shape and trace it. It'll be here. And in this case, on the French dart, the dart excess points down. So you'll make sure you'll push that down, and that's how you'll get your shape for the French dart. And then, what is the other one that we're gonna do? I think we're also gonna do this mid armhole dart. So in this case, it takes your dart and it pivots it up to the middle of the armhole. A really great place to do that is where this notch already exists. It's a perfect place. It's right in the middle. So I would say go ahead and pivot right up to that armhole. So you'll do this here. You'll slash and spread, and then you'll get this opening. And again, because this is on the side, you'll have the dart excess pointing down, and you'll get this new shape here. And then you'll retrace everything, adding seam allowance as well. And that will be all we'll do for the single darts.